Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Baroness Cash, for starting us off with an uplifting start to the day. I'm Stuart McDonald. I am a partner at LCP. We're a consultancy who advise in the actuarial space and also have a health analytics practice, doctors advising into life sciences. So we're really, really well positioned for the thought and debate on the longevity topic. I'm also the incoming chair of the continuous mortality investigation. That is my favourite corner of the actuarial profession, and the part focused on mortality, longevity, morbidity, sickness rates, and we've actually been around for 100 years, as I'll be talking to you about, and projecting models of life expectancy and mortality. I'm going to give a talk called The Actuary's Perspective. I'm going to talk you through some of the statistics. So the thing that unites us in this room, I think, is our awareness of longevity and the sort of big macro trends towards longer, healthier lives. But actually, I'm going to zoom in a bit on the recent years. I'm going to talk about what's been going on with mortality over the last decade. I'm going to talk then about some of the challenges that we're facing and some of the opportunities. So essentially, how an actuary will think about longevity and life expectancy. So the sort of short, medium, and longer term drivers of changes to mortality rates and thus life expectancy. And I'll finish with how we bring all that together as actuaries to try and do the difficult business of projecting mortality, forecasting life expectancy. So let's start with current mortality. So this is a chart from the continuous mortality investigation. Hopefully you're able to read it. There's quite a lot going on. Essentially, it's looking at mortality rates since 2015, age standardized, as they developed through the year. Now, when we first started producing these charts, you'd get a nice, neat fan shape where the oldest year was at the top and the newest year was at the bottom, because you had essentially gradual improvements in mortality. Since around 2010 and over this period, things have been a bit of a mess. So the macro trend of improving mortality has slowed right down. There's been a lot more volatility, the ultimate example of which being a global pandemic. But actually now, interestingly, if we look at the last 2 years, so the bottom solid yellow line is 2024. That's the last complete line. And we had the lowest mortality rates that we've seen in this country. Now, that is a sort of glass half full, glass half empty statement. So mortality should improve every year. Life expectancy should improve. You know, we don't celebrate highest stock market level ever. But we hadn't seen any improvement for 5 years. So the fact that we are now a smidge better than 2019 in 2024 means that we have seen our first bit of mortality improvement. But 5 years with almost no mortality improvement. That would be my glass half empty take. The last time we saw 5 years with no mortality improvement was the early 1970s. This isn't something that happens often. And then the black line is 2025. So actually, year to date, we are on track for record low mortality. I say that cautiously because watch the current flu season, which has just kicked off 3 months earlier than it normally does, and looks like it's not going to be a nice one if we look at experience from around the world. So I'm expecting the health service to come under a lot of pressure in November, December that's normally reserved for January. So that black line won't necessarily continue its nice, neat downward projection. I'm going to dive now into what's going on by age group, because this really matters. It matters to us all as individuals. It matters for forecasts of life expectancy. Now, this is a simpler chart. It's just showing you, each dot is essentially the mortality rate in a particular year since 2012. I've just plotted a simple straight line linear trend. This is what was going on in terms of annual improvement year on year before the pandemic. I've highlighted the since the onset of the pandemic years in pink, so that they stand out a bit more, and 2025, the dot is the first 9 months of 2025. So actually for pensioners, things aren't so bad. We had some really bad years, obviously. You can see just how extraordinarily high mortality was in 2020 and 2021. But in 2024 and 2025, we're back on that kind of simple linear trend of improvement. So it doesn't seem like a particularly concerning picture. But the key question is what will happen to future generations of pensioners and what is happening to the working age population. So if we look at my age group, now this is people aged 45 to 64. I just creep into the lower end of that. Things are not back on track by any stretch. Now, obviously, the death rates here are much lower. We've come down an order of magnitude. The scale is going from 4 to 5, no longer, where it was 40 to 50 on the previous slide. Mortality rates normally pretty flat, pretty predictable, but much, much higher since the pandemic and have not recovered. So there is still clearly an ongoing issue. Death rates today, 2024, 2025, similar to where they were in 2012, 2013. So it's clear that there is an ongoing challenge. And now the perhaps more shocking slide. I realise not everyone in the room is an actuary, but I think everyone in the room will be very comfortable with the idea that death rates should not slope upwards. We talk about mortality improvement as actuaries. It's baked into our whole language and way of thinking. Things have been going in the wrong direction for young adults, and it's not just because of the pandemic. This is a pre-existing trend. So the line I'm showing you is the 2012 to 2019 trend. Some positive signs from the 2025 point, which is below the line, but you can see that trend has been sloping upwards. And this is a combination of different factors. At the lower end of this, people in their 20s, obviously it's the deaths of despair, the case-eaten work, the suicides, accidents, and acute alcohol and overdoses. But towards the upper end, there is much more of a chronic issue going on. We're seeing issues from early onset cancers. We're seeing a lot of metabolic conditions that really ought not to be affecting people in their early 40s and late 30s. So certainly some warning signs. And obviously, I haven't majored on it for today. I'm going to be brief, but huge socioeconomic differences there, with most of this for the more deprived groups, those disproportionately making up much more of the young age deaths. So I'll talk now briefly about some of the driving factors, so some of the positives and negatives that are feeding in, that we consider as actuaries when we try to forecast the future. So this is for some work that I did with the health analytics colleagues that I mentioned previously. So I surveyed a panel of medics in different fields with different specialisms on some of the key reasons that factors that we would expect to be driving mortality over the next 10 years or so. So you can see where the focus is. So the green is the good news, essentially. The blue is the headwinds. And the size of the text essentially is giving you a view of the relative importance. So missed and delayed treatments and diagnosis, delays in urgent and routine care. So these indirect consequences of the pandemic, well, I call them that. We already had a building trend, increasing challenge, worsening performance year on year within the health service. But the pandemic kind of rocketed us forward a decade in that upward trend of pressures, and we haven't yet recovered from it. Some good news too, particularly around innovation and new treatments. And I'll try and include a small section on reasons to be cheerful from a life expectancy perspective. Some of these stats will be reasonably well known. This chart is showing you ambulance response times for category 2 emergencies, so heart attacks and strokes. Target is 18 minutes, very, very important to reach people quickly to improve their chance of survival and their quality of life if they do survive. Generally pre-pandemic, we were there or thereabouts, 20 minutes or so, but 40 to 60 minutes during much of the peak of the pandemic, hitting that real peak of 90-minute wait on average in December 2022 when we had flu and COVID hitting simultaneously, and no recovery since. There's no month where we've got back close to that 18-minute target since the onset of the pandemic. So real concerns within the acute part of the health service. There's other stats as well, like A&E waiting times I could show you, but I'll be brief. If we look more at the chronic side, this is cancer treatment time. So to get to treatment within, it used to be 2 months, it's now 62 days because somebody figured out that they kept missing the target in February, and there was a nice way to massage the statistics. So, but you can see generally until about 2013-14, hitting that target, drifting off course year on year subsequently. Slight improvement since the measure was changed, but also a genuine bit of improvement, I would say, over the last 2 years. But it's really slow progress. Projecting that forward, it feels like it's going to be a long time before the health service is back on target with treatment of cancer. This is some work I did that was cited in the NHS 10-year plan on how our ageing population, how the longevity that we're all experiencing actually plays into increasing healthcare demand. Essentially, if current trends continue, by 2034-35, we'll be spending almost as much every year as we were spending at the peak of the pandemic on healthcare. This is government-funded healthcare. This is driven by a few factors. Principally, it is factors like the aging population. It is factors like the increased demand and healthcare utilization. And this applies across the socioeconomic spectrum, both the sick groups who are reaching middle age with increasing multimorbidity, but also the sort of healthy, affluent people who are reaching their sort of 70s and 80s and have an expectation of ongoing care that their predecessors wouldn't have had. You know, try telling somebody that they're, you know, in their late 70s they're too old for a hip operation. They would quite rightly push back quite hard on that. And so we've got this increasing utilization, we've got increasing demand from the aging population, and then of course we've got healthcare costs which have traditionally risen faster than GDP. So all of these playing into this increased demand. To stop that demand going up is really going to take some quite extreme change by government. So to manage to flatline that, we modelled that you needed to do two things. You need to deal with healthcare inequalities in this country. So you need to level up so that the poorest groups are living in similar levels of health to more affluent, and also get increased productivity in the healthcare service, which has been historically very, very hard to do. There is some reasons to be cheerful for ongoing increasing life expectancy. Plenty of really exciting science going on. The most here and now that everyone will be aware of is anti-obesity medicines. So much of ill health, multimorbidity is related to obesity-related conditions. It really is an underlying factor in so many of the things that drive mortality and that drive ill health. It's linked to diabetes, heart failure, myocardial infarction, overall 40% higher mortality. So no surprise then that the SELECT trial has found a 20% reduction in mortality rates for people taking these medicines. All sorts of further, that was for a condition, people with pre-existing cardiovascular conditions, but all sorts of ongoing research into the benefits for other treatments as well. So really, really exciting space that I'm sure most people are well aware of. So how do we bring all this together as actuaries when forecasting life expectancy? So talking now with my other hat, essentially, as incoming chair of the CMI. So the CMI, for those that aren't aware, it's a subsidiary of the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries. We've been around since just before the last pandemic, just after, sorry. So we think we were set up in 2024. It might have been 25. The documents are a little bit flaky in terms of when we had the first meeting versus when we first published. And all about producing this high quality impartial analysis of mortality and morbidity. CMI is funded by subscribers. But and most of our work is for subscribers, so it's looking at pension and mortality, it's looking at the insured population. But we did quite a lot during the pandemic, particularly in terms of doing national population mortality monitoring, filling a gap. We felt that the way the ONS was doing it was essentially they weren't looking at age standardized mortality, they were just looking at death counts. I won't get into why that's not the right way to do it, but we put a lot more work into the public domain during COVID, and that's probably when most people became aware of the organisation. So the CMI model is a mortality projection model. We release a new version every year. It's available to CMI subscribers. And essentially what you do is you start from a base table where mortality is today for the population you're interested in, which might be members of a particular pension scheme or an insurance company's portfolio, or it might be the general population of England and Wales or the UK. and then you project forward. And what you're doing essentially is you're combining a relatively short-term extrapolative approach where you look at how mortality trends have varied for people of different age groups, people born in different years and over time, and you're combining that with a more subjective long-term view, which will be taking into account things like how much benefit do I think we will be seeing from medical innovations 20, 25 years from now. And this is the users, it's called the users' long-term rate, or their long-term view on mortality improvement. So major consultation ahead of CMI 2024. This was our first version of the model where we really iterated to allow for the impact of the pandemic and address that. We also wanted to reflect these different trends in mortality by age, because these are really significant and drive quite different outcomes. So a couple of charts at the bottom just showing you how the model has changed from the last version, which was the last one to sort of muddle through the pandemic and sort of try and smooth through, ignore the recent data and put mortality to an approximately correct starting place, to this newer version. So you can see for the younger ages, we are much less optimistic. We're actually projecting increasing mortality in the short term and then turning around and starting to improve as we go further into the future. Whereas for the older age groups, the pensioners, we've become more optimistic. We're expecting slightly higher mortality improvement than we were previously, so a steeper downwards trend. And what does all this mean in terms of life expectancies? So this is giving you an indication of where we think the life expectancy is for people of different ages in 2025. This is using a pensioner mortality table, so this is a relatively select group, more healthy than the general population of England and Wales, and it's an illustrative long-term rate of mortality improvement of about 1.5%, which is reasonably 1 to 1.5, I would say, is what we've seen historically, but it does vary a lot. We've seen periods of limited mortality improvement, and we've seen periods of 3 or 4%, as we saw in the 90s and the early 2000s, when life expectancy was increasing by about 15 minutes every hour. So yes, for life expectancy at 65, roughly around pensioner age, we'd be expecting males to get to about 86.5 and females to get to about 89. So that's essentially what's coming out of that. But there's obviously a degree of subjectivity there, and a lot will depend on how much benefit you think we will get from various innovations that we've talked about. So I'm going to pause there. I'm conscious I'm approaching the end of my 20 minutes, but very, very happy to take 1 or 2 questions if anyone has any.
Shall I start? Can you hear me? Shall I start again? Yeah. Okay. So you showed the health spending and said that it was in a large part attributable to the aging population, but you also showed increasing mortality rates in younger people. Have you got a breakdown of the proportion of spend that's attributable to different age groups?
I don't have it memorised. The work that comes from certainly does. The spend it varies hugely over the life course, as you would expect. Most of the spend is on people later in life. So there's very, very limited spend on people in their 20s and 30s, slightly higher for women, obviously, all the issues around maternity. But generally for males and females, mortality for people healthcare spending on people in their teens, 20s, 30s, very, very low. Essentially increases almost exponentially with age. And this is why, as we have more and more people living to older ages, the spend goes up. I think from memory, I think the spending on someone in their 80s, 90s is about 9 times what you'd be spending on someone in their 30s. So you can imagine as more and more of the population are in their 60s, 70s and above, the spending inevitably just goes up and up.
What do you think this is going to create for a generational sort of, because we have already a population that's shrinking on this younger end. Now you have a higher mortality in that space, and you've got the people on the longer end living longer, consuming more. it feels like that's a tension that's going to have to be resolved somehow.
Yes, I completely agree. It's a big question, and I've only covered the healthcare angle here. I did some work over the weekend on the state pension, and I know Andrew's going to be talking about that. But both in terms of the pension spending that we have as a country, and also the healthcare spending, both of those are on trends to go up and up. So we have smaller populations, lower fertility recently. So there is a very large burden potentially on the working age population that we need to figure out how to square that circle. And, some of that is going to be about reimagining how we live our lives, as Andrew's work shows.
Can I just ask, like the two key trends that you've identified in here, one is, improvements in longevity of people over the age of 65, is that we're back at, after COVID, we're back on track to a, quite marked improvement in that area, offset by the negative news of increasing mortality rates amongst younger age groups. To what degree is that a UK-specific phenomenon, and to what degree is that an international? It would help to identify: is it problems with the health service? Is it specific to the UK, or is this a global development? These two trends.
Yeah, great question. The long-term trend of increasing life expectancy, falling mortality is global, as we'll all be aware, I think. The slowdown in mortality improvement is largely, it is international, but it's not everywhere. So some countries have continued to eke out improvements. Anglosphere countries particularly, so the UK, Canada, North America, Australia, have seen more pronounced slowdown in mortality. The increasing mortality rates for younger ages and more deprived groups, it's really a UK and USA phenomenon. So the US has it worse than us. And, so these are really, we do stand out, I would say, from global peers. And so we do need to be thinking, I would say not necessarily, at these age groups, it's not about the NHS. The point that was made earlier about, the NHS is sort of a sickness service. A lot of the drivers of deaths are not long-term chronic illnesses. They're either acute deaths of despair, or they are sort of, the consequences of chronic ill health, long-term alcoholism, or unhealthy diets. So there are factors that are very specific to the UK and the USA that I think we need to look at. Some other countries also seeing a pretty unimpressive recent trend of recent mortality, but this rising mortality, mostly just us and the Americans.